On a low rise in southern England, there are holes in the ground where something once stood. Great posts of pine, raised by human hands around 8000 BCE, set into the chalk and left to rot until only their empty sockets remained. They are among the oldest monumental structures ever found in Britain, and they sit on the same ground as a far more famous one. When the first pyramid was cut from the rock of Egypt, this place had already been sacred for thousands of years. Its name is Stonehenge, but the stone circle everyone pictures is only the final chapter. The people who raised it did something the established story still cannot fully explain. They built the whole monument out of stones that did not belong here, dragged in from the far ends of the island. If the pyramids were the beginning, then what is this? To understand what makes this hill remarkable, you have to set it against what the whole world already knows. For most people, the pyramids of Egypt are where the story begins. The achievement that seems to mark the moment human beings first built on a scale meant to last forever. The oldest of them, the step pyramid of the pharaoh Djoser, was raised around 2670 BCE. The Great Pyramid followed a little over a century later. To most of us, that is the dawn of the built world. It was not. Long before a single block was cut in Egypt, people were raising monuments on the ground beneath Stonehenge. Those empty post holes are the proof. Around 8000 BCE, hunter-gatherers set great pillars of pine into this chalk, posts as thick as a man, arranged with what looks like deliberate intent. They are among the earliest monumental structures ever found in the British Isles, and they predate the first pyramid by more than 5,000 years. And the posts were only the beginning. When the first farmers came to this landscape, they inherited a place that already carried meaning, and answered it in earth and stone. Across the plain around Stonehenge, in the centuries around 3700 to 3500 BCE, they built long barrows to hold their dead, raised a great causewayed enclosure at Robin Hood's ball, and cut an enormous ceremonial avenue called the Cursus, all of it more than 1,000 years before Egypt cut the first stone of its first pyramid. This is the honest weight of the claim. Not that one circle is older than one tomb, but that an entire tradition of building was already ancient here 1,000 years deep, while the pyramids were still unimagined. Then, around 3000 BCE, came the monument itself. And it did not begin as stone at all. What the first builders of Stonehenge made was a ring of earth, a great circular ditch and bank more than 100 meters across, cut into the chalk with antler picks and bare hands. Inside it, they dug 56 pits, the holes we now call the Aubrey holes, and within that ring they laid their dead, cremated bone gathered and buried across generations. Before there was ever a stone circle here, Stonehenge was the largest cemetery in Neolithic Britain. A house of the dead, sunk into a hill that had already been sacred for thousands of years. Hold that against Egypt. By the time the Great Pyramid rose at Giza, this place was not new. The earthwork was already centuries old, the dead already in the ground. Stonehenge was not Egypt's contemporary, scrambling to match it. It was its elder. And yet the age, extraordinary as it is not the part that should stop you. Old graves exist. People have always buried their dead and marked their ground. What sets this hill apart is not when it was built, but what it was built from. Because when those Neolithic farmers finally raised stones on this spot, they did not use the rock beneath their feet. They reached across an entire island, and in one case across the sea, for stone that had no business being here at all. And that one decision is where the real mystery begins. Stand inside Stonehenge today, and you are surrounded by two very different kinds of stone. The giants are the sarsens, the towering uprights and lintels that give the monument its shape. but threaded between them is a second, smaller set, darker and unevenly shaped, easy to overlook. These are the bluestones, and they are the ones that should not be here. Each weighs between 2 and 3 tons, and the nearest source for them is not anywhere on Salisbury Plain. It is the Preseli Hills, in the far southwest of Wales, around 150 miles away. Somehow, more than 1,500 years ago, these stones crossed that entire distance to rest on this hill. For a long time, that claim rested on guesswork. Then the science caught up. A team led by Professor Richard Bevins of Aberystwyth University began testing the bluestones the way a forensic lab tests evidence, reading the chemical fingerprint locked inside the rock. They measured the precise levels of elements like thorium and zirconium, the trace signature that ties a stone to the exact outcrop it was torn from. The match was clean. Fragments traced directly to a rocky spur in North Pembrokeshire called Creg Rhos y Phelan, and the fingerprint was unmistakable. These stones came from Welsh. Not everyone accepts what that means, and the argument matters. The geologist Dr. Brian John has argued that human beings did not haul these stones at all. He points to glaciers. In the depths of the last ice age, sheets of ice ground across Britain, powerful enough to pluck rock from one place and drop it in another. But the glacier theory runs into a problem it has never solved. If ice had carried this stone across southern Britain, it would not have delivered it neatly to a single hill. Glaciers do not aim, they scatter. The land for miles around Stonehenge should be littered with stray Welsh bluestone, dropped wherever the ice melted. It is not. The Preseli stone is found at Stonehenge, and effectively nowhere else on the plain. No trail, no debris field. Just a single concentration of foreign rock sitting exactly where someone chose to put it. That is not how ice behaves. That is how people behave. And the bluestones are only the smaller half. The sarsens are heavier almost beyond comprehension. The largest stand over 7 meters tall and weigh more than 20 tons apiece, each a single block of dense sandstone. Geochemical analysis pinned most of them to Westwoods in Wiltshire, around 15 to 20 miles north, closer than Wales, certainly. But consider what 20 miles means for a 20-ton stone moved by people with no wheel, no metal tools, and no animal strong enough to pull the load. Everyone was dragged by human muscle, rope, and timber, mile after mile to this single spot. So hold the scale in your mind. Stones of 2 and 3 tons carried 150 miles from Wales. Stones of more than 20 tons dragged from 20 miles off. A monument assembled from rock gathered from across the country, when easier stone lay all around them. They did not build with what was near, they built with what they wanted. And then there is one stone that breaks the map completely. At the very center of Stonehenge, beneath 2 fallen sarsens that toppled across it long ago, lies a single slab of sandstone, nearly 5 meters long, around 6 tons in weight, set flat at the heart of the monument where everything else is arranged to point. Generations have called it the altar stone, though no one knows what it was for. For more than a century, no one knew where it came from either. And the answer, when it arrived, was stranger than anyone had prepared for. The assumption for decades was that the altar stone was simply another Welsh import. It was sandstone, it was foreign, and Wales had already proven the source of so much else on the site. But when researchers tested it, the Welsh connection fell apart. In 2023, analysis ruled out an origin anywhere in the Anglo-Welsh basin. The stone did not match Wales at all, which left a deeper question with no answer. If not Wales, then where had this 6-ton slab come from? The answer came in 2024, and it landed like a thunderclap. A team led from Curtin University read the stone the way the bluestones had been read, but deeper, dating the tiny crystals of zircon, apatite, and rutile locked inside it. Those ages form a fingerprint, and that fingerprint did not point to southern Britain. It did not point to Wales. It pointed to the Orcadian Basin in the far northeast of Scotland, near the very tip of the country, more than 750 kilometers away. Around 460 miles. The most important stone at the heart of Stonehenge had been brought from the other end of the island. Take a moment with that distance, because it is almost impossible to hold. A 6-ton block, moved without wheels, without metal, without draft animals, across the length of Britain. Whether overland through hundreds of miles of forest, hill and river, or floated by sea around a treacherous coast, either route is an act of staggering ambition. And the same tired objection appeared. Could a glacier have carried the stone south and saved the builders the journey? But the latest work, modeling how the ice actually moved during the last glaciation, found no glacial route from northeast Scotland down to Salisbury Plain. The ice there flowed the wrong way, away from Stonehenge. Once again, the evidence pushes toward the same conclusion. Human hands, a deliberate journey, a choice. And here is the detail that should reframe everything. There are more than 900 stone circles across Britain and Ireland. Every other one was built sensibly from stone close to hand. Stonehenge is the only exception. Not one of its stones is local. The sarsens from Wiltshire, the bluestones from Wales, the altar stone from the far north of Scotland. Every single stone was hauled in from somewhere else, some from the ends of the country. There is no other site like it in these islands. It stands alone, a monument assembled entirely from elsewhere. That fact removes the easy explanations. You cannot say they used what was nearby, because they pointedly did not. Every stone represents a journey of months of labor and the coordinated effort of hundreds of people across generations. No one drags a nation's worth of stone across rivers and seas without a reason that mattered more than the cost. Which forces the real question into the open, not how they did it. But why? Why would anyone go to such impossible lengths to gather the stones of an entire island in one place? For a long time, the question of why was treated as unanswerable. But the discovery of the altar stone's Scottish origin did something unexpected. It did not just deepen the puzzle. It offered the beginning of an answer. Because once you know the stones came from Wales, from Wiltshire, and from the far north of Scotland, a pattern emerges from the impossibility. These were not random sources. They were the corners of a world. In 2024, researchers from University College London and Aberystwyth University put that idea into words. Stonehenge may have been built as a monument of unification. Look at what it gathers: stone from the southwest of Wales, from central southern England, and from the northern tip of Scotland. 3 distant regions, peoples who in all likelihood spoke differently, lived differently, and rarely, if ever, met. And their stones, brought together and raised as one structure on a single hill. The monument was not just built in a place, it was built out of a whole island, as if to bind the scattered communities of Neolithic Britain into something shared. That reading turns the impossible logistics into the point. The distance was not a problem the builders reluctantly overcame. The distance was the message. To haul a stone the length of the country and set it at the center was to say that this place belonged to all of them, that the people of the far north and the far west and the plain were joined here, in this ring, under the same sky. It was a statement carved not in words, but in the only language that would outlast them. Stone, and effort, and distance. And the popular imagination still gets the builders wrong. These were not lost wanderers, not the primitive savages of the old story. They were Neolithic farming communities, people who worked the land, kept herds, and could organize labor on a scale that still seems impossible. No writing, no metal, no wheel, no machine of any kind. And yet they coordinated the movement of stones across an entire country and raised a monument that has stood for 4,500 years. The work carried out across generations, each adding to a structure none of them would ever see finished. That is not the product of compulsion alone. It is the product of belief. And at the center of that belief was something simpler and older: the dead. Remember what Stonehenge was before it was ever a ring of standing stones, a cemetery, the largest of its kind in Neolithic Britain, the cremated remains of generations laid into the chalk. Long before the great stones arrived, this was a place where people brought their ancestors and gave them to the ground. The monument that rose afterward was raised over that act of remembrance in honor of it. A house for the dead that grew across centuries into a house for an entire people. At its heart, a place for the ancestors, where the living came to honor the dead and stand together as one. But the people who built it did not stop at uniting the land. They turned their monument toward the heavens. Anyone who has stood at Stonehenge on the right morning knows the monument was built with the sky in mind. This part is not in dispute. On the summer solstice, the longest day, the sun rises directly over the heel stone, the great outlier beyond the main circle, and sends its first light straight into the heart of the monument. In deep midwinter, the arrangement reverses, the setting sun on the shortest day aligning through the great trilithon, where the builders aimed at it. These alignments are not accidents. They are deliberate and precise enough that thousands still gather to watch them happen. The builders watched the sun, marked its turning points, and built those moments permanently into stone. The question is how far that knowledge went, and here the story moves from solid ground into fierce argument. In 2022, the archaeologist Professor Timothy Darvill of Bournemouth University proposed something far bolder. He suggested Stonehenge was, in effect, a calendar carved in stone, a device for tracking the entire solar year of 365 and a quarter days. His reasoning ran like this. The sarsens circle was built from 30 upright stones, and 30, he argued, was no arbitrary number. Each stone stood for a day of a month, 12 months, giving 360 days. The remaining 5 were marked by the 5 stones of the central horseshoe, and the 4 station stones allowed for the leap day every 4th year. In Darvill's reading, the whole monument was a working machine for keeping time, a perpetual calendar a viewer could stand inside. It is an elegant idea. It is also, many insist, wrong. In 2023, the mathematician Giulio Magli and the astronomer Juan Antonio Belmonte published a blunt rebuttal. The calendar theory, they argued, rested on forced interpretations and numerology, numbers made to mean something they were never shown to mean. The monument contains nothing that actually embodies the number 12, the months the theory depends on. And there is a deeper problem of precision. In the days around a solstice, the sun barely seems to move along the horizon, drifting so slowly that no one at Stonehenge could have used it to fix the exact length of the year. A device that cannot tell you which day it is, they argued, is not a calendar. Other leading experts agreed there is no good evidence the builders kept a formal calendar at all. So we are left with an honest division. There is no serious doubt these people watched the sky with care and built the sun's great turning points into their monument. The solstice alignments are real and exact. But the grander claim, that the stones formed a precise, countable calendar, remains one researcher's contested interpretation, challenged by others who study the ancient sky for a living. Whether they encoded a working calendar in stone is a question the evidence has not settled and may never settle. But the direction of their attention is what matters. These were people watching the heavens closely enough to anchor a 100-ton arrangement of stone to the movement of the sun across the year. That is not the behavior of people stumbling through the dark, And the sun may not have been the only thing they were watching. The sun is easy to follow. It rises and sets within a predictable band, and its yearly rhythm can be learned in a single lifetime. The moon is another matter. To understand its deepest pattern, you would have to watch the sky with patience across decades. There is growing evidence that the builders of Stonehenge did exactly that. The pattern is called a major lunar standstill. Most of the time, the moon rises and sets within a familiar range over a single month. But layered on top of that monthly motion is a far slower cycle, one that takes 18.6 years to complete. Across that span, the extremes of moonrise and moonset themselves drift until they reach their furthest possible points on the horizon, then turn back. To even notice this, an observer would have to track the moon across nearly 2 decades, remembering where it rose a generation before. This is knowledge measured not in years, but in lifetimes, and Stonehenge appears to hold that knowledge in its layout. Set around the monument are the 4 station stones arranged as a rectangle. Only 2 survive, but their positions are known, and the short sides of that rectangle align with the extreme rising and setting points of the moon at a major standstill. The orientation is too neat to dismiss easily. The builders, it seems, did not just track the sun. They may have built the moon's furthest reach into the architecture of the site itself. Then there is the detail that gives the idea its weight, and it returns us to the dead. Before it was a ring of stone, Stonehenge was a cremation cemetery, and those burials were not scattered evenly. They cluster, heavily, in the southeastern part of the monument, the very direction where the moon rises at its most extreme southern point during a standstill. The dead were laid in the ground, facing the most distant moonrise. Whatever that meant to them, it does not look like coincidence. It looks like the living placed their ancestors deliberately in the path of the moon. Because the standstill is so rare, the chance to test these ideas comes only twice in a generation. One window opened recently, reaching its peak in January of 2025, and in the months on either side, a team from the universities of Oxford, Leicester, and Bournemouth, working with English heritage, went to Stonehenge to watch it happen. Among them were the archaeologists Amanda Chadburn, Clive Ruggles, and Fabio Silva. Night after night, weather permitting, they recorded the moon rising and setting against the stones, testing the theory against the real sky. And here, as with the calendar, honesty demands a careful line. Whether the lunar alignment was truly deliberate, or whether the eye is simply drawn to a pattern the builders never intended, is still under genuine debate. But the convergence is hard to ignore. The station stones point to the moon's extremes. The dead lie in the direction of its furthest rising, and a people who tracked the sun with such care would have had every reason to follow the harder light as well. What emerges is a portrait of builders watching the entire sky, binding their monument to the sun across the year and very possibly to the moon across the decades. Sight was woven into the stones. But there is one more sense these people may have built for, a quality you cannot see at all. You can only hear it. Stand inside the ring and speak, and the stones answer. That, at least, is what a recent study set out to test. A team of acoustics engineers at the University of Salford built a precise scale model of Stonehenge, 1/12 of its real size, recreating every stone in the positions it would have held around 4,500 years ago, including the many since fallen or vanished. They called it Mini-Henge. Then, in a specialist acoustic chamber, they filled it with sound and listened to what the monument did with it. The result was striking. Inside the circle, voices and sound carried with remarkable clarity, amplified by the surrounding stones, bouncing back and forth between the great uprights without dissolving into echo. The lead researcher, Trevor Cox, described the effect as the stones throwing the sound back at you. But the more revealing finding was what happened at the boundary. The stones that lifted sound so well on the inside also held it in. Noise made within the ring barely escaped beyond it, and sound from outside struggled to get in. The circle was, in effect, an acoustic room without a roof. Think about what that means. A voice raised in ceremony at the center would have reached everyone within the ring with force and clarity, while the crowd gathered outside heard almost nothing of it. The monument that could be seen for miles, that announced itself across the whole of Salisbury Plain, kept its sound for the few who were allowed inside. It impressed the many, but it spoke to the few. Whatever happened at the heart of Stonehenge was meant for a chosen circle, screened from the watching world outside the stones. For most of the last 1,000 years, none of this was known, and the silence was filled with magic. People simply could not believe that ordinary human beings had raised these stones. So they reached for the only explanation grand enough. In the 12th century, the writer Geoffrey of Monmouth set down the most famous version. The stones, he wrote, were a great ring brought from Ireland, hauled there in turn from Africa by giants, and carried at last to Salisbury Plain by the magic of the wizard Merlin, raised to honor the dead of a slaughtered British host. Others said giants built it, or that it rose before the biblical flood, the work of a lost world. For centuries, this felt easier to accept than the truth. And here is the truth those legends were hiding from. No wizard was needed, no giants, no magic, no lost civilization. What raised Stonehenge was 1,000 years of accumulated human skill, a people who buried their dead by the moon, anchored their monument to the sun, shaped the very sound within the circle, and dragged the stones of an entire island across land and sea to gather them in one place. And beneath even that, in the chalk, lie the empty post holes from 8,000 years before, proof that the sacred story of this ground runs 5,000 years before the first pyramid, and that most of it is still buried, unread, waiting. Go back to where this began. A low rise in southern England, holes in the chalk where great posts once stood, raised 8,000 years before the first pyramid. That ground was already sacred when the stones arrived, and the people who raised them did the impossible without a single machine. They gathered an island into one ring. They hauled stone from Wales, from Wiltshire, from the far tip of Scotland. They bound the sun to the longest day, and very likely the moon to its furthest rising, and shaped the sound within the circle. No wizard lifted these stones, no giants carried them across the sea, only people, and 1,000 years of them, building on a hill that was old before Egypt began. So the real question is the one no one can answer. How much older does this story go, and what still waits beneath the grass?